we're in the thick of things politically. And we've played a major part, I think, in moving the entire British Labour movement to the left. And this is something of outstanding importance, new in British politics.
Good evening. A big claim by the leader of the British Communist Party, Mr. John Gollan. In Panorama tonight, Britain's communists talk about themselves and their ambitions. It's a time when many people on the right in British politics believe that the communists do have a serious hand in industrial unrest, while many on the left just as vehemently deny it. Our report is by Alan Watson, and watching it with him are two MPs, Angus Maude, Conservative, and Roy Hattersley, a Labour shadow minister, and with them a trade unionist, Hugh Scanlon, President of the Engineering Workers. They'll be commenting afterwards. So what is the role of the Communist Party in Britain today? In a speech at the weekend, Mr. Wilson referred to a minority of militants ready to use any industrial grievance to make industry totally unworkable, in the hope, he said, that from the resulting chaos, a new order of things would develop. With the strikes we've been having, and particularly with the miners voting on whether they should have a national strike, the South Wales miners' delegates called for industrial action unanimously today. Panorama tonight hears and then tests the communist claims to influence. Here's Alan Watson's report.
Govan Hill, Glasgow. The Dixon Halls, a suitably Gothic setting for the Scottish Communist Party's star Burns Night supper. This piper plays only at left-wing gatherings, and for the party, Burns is very much the left's poet militant. It's a social evening, but to communists, every occasion has its ideological content.
To the good health of the company.
The Scottish company numbers 7,000, almost a quarter of the party's national membership, now back to what it was a generation ago, 30,000. The party's had its successes, but it's never come anywhere near celebrating victory over British capitalism. The haggis has proved easier to stab.
And cut you up with ready slicht, trenching your gushing entrails brecht like ony ditch. And wow, oh, what a glorious sight, warm, reeking, rich.
2 years ago, at Upper Clyde Shipbuilders, Scottish communists initiated a drama almost as theatrical as Burns Night, but of far greater political significance.
But we are saying that there's forces out with 10 Downing Street. There is forces outside Parliament, and that's the British trade union and labour movement.
The work-in, which after 14 months forced the government to rescue UCS, was run by the Shop Stewards Committee. Its leader was the UCS convener, Jimmy Reid. He was also a member of the Communist Party's governing body, the Political Committee. His success on Clydeside hammered home the potential of direct action.
Everyone sign!
Bernie Steer, one of the 5 dockers imprisoned for contempt of the Industrial Relations Court last year, also acted as the focus for militant direct action. The dock strike had its economic causes, but the consequences were political. Direct confrontation with the law, as well as a rare, and to the left, very precious demonstration of unofficial shop steward pressure, allied to official TUC protest. Direct action was again the key to last year's miners' strike. Picketing led to arrests and to clashes with authority, a development the communist minority welcomed. Moderate trade unionists began to pursue the logic of confrontation. The conflict increasingly became bitter, but they stopped short when they closed the power stations and won the Wilberforce Award. Seafield Colliery, today a showpiece in Scotland. The union's branch here is communist-dominated. So is the executive of the Scottish NUM, and has been for years. Its present General Secretary is Communist Bill McLean. I asked him what the communists in the union used their power for.
Well, firstly, our main concern is to improve the wages and conditions of the membership of the NUM. That's our first primary concern. But we see the union and its historical role also involved in social questions. And therefore the communist leadership of the NUM in Scotland don't only deal with wages and conditions, but becomes involved and involves the membership and local labour parties, the trades councils, and deal with questions housing, health, education, and issues of this kind.
Does this also follow inevitably from seeing the struggle within the trade union movement as part of a wider class struggle itself?
Yes, the struggle within the trade union movement is only part of the general struggle, because the aim of the Communist Party is to establish socialism in this country, and the trade union movement have a prime responsible role in this regard.
Were the communist members on the national executive clearer about the political significance of the national coal strike last year than the other members were?
I would say yes, that the communists and the lefts on the national executive were much more clearer about the significance of the struggle, because each day it went on, the working miner recognised that it wasn't a struggle against the coal board, but indeed was a strike and a struggle against government and to change government policy. And that's what happened, in fact.
On the night that the strike ended, you in fact voted for it to continue, I believe. What do you think would have resulted if it had continued?
I think what had happened had been real confrontation involving the entire trade union movement in this country. And it's been said often by the right wing that you shouldn't use the trade union for political purposes. But it's the Communist Party view that you can't separate industrial and political questions.
But do you see the miners, in fact, during this year, going to the forefront of industrial action again?
I would say that the feeling here in Scotland, I can't say totally for the British miners, but based on pithead meetings that we've done all over the Scottish coalfield covering every shift, there is a feeling among Scottish miners that they're prepared once again to take the government on.
Left leadership does seem to be much stronger within the trade union movement as a whole now than it has been in past years. Do you see this as the future direction, or do you think it's only a temporary advance for your side?
No, I think it's a natural development that's taking place and will continue.
Have you any proof of that?
Yes. I would say, in fact, that we'll find in the trade union movement, in the very near future, new leaders being thrown up to replace all leaders that are going away. And it'll be militant left leadership that'll be elected. That meets aspirations and desires of the membership of the trade union movement.
Of the 15 men who lead the Scottish miners, 9 are communists, including the president, vice president and secretary. But communist influence has always been larger than even these numbers suggest. Because of their commitment, they put in the hard slog that wins them widespread support as conscientious trade unionists. But their main task is ideological, as communists at Seafield explain.
Industrial battles have always been with us before the Communist Party existed, and they will always be with us, in our view, until we finally resolve the problem of what system we should live under. We believe emphatically that society requires change, and therefore the ideological work of the Communist Party is the most important aspect of our work. We've got to convince people that our policy is not only correct on the immediate term, but indeed has the lasting solution to many of the problems that they will constantly face under this system.
How do you transform the sort of emotional support that you may get in a strike into, in fact, a commitment to the ideology?
Well, last year we had confrontation with the government in relation to the wages claim. This year we're going to have the same confrontation. Now, in this fight, I think it's necessary, the Communist Party feel that it's necessary to inject into the discussions that will rage during this battle that may take place, that it's not only necessary to win the economic battle, but to change the circumstances that give rise to the crisis affecting miners. Because every year, since ever I become a member of the miners' union, we've had battles on the wages issue, but haven't they transformed society and do away with the circumstances that give rise to this? And this is why it's necessary, in my opinion, to install into the campaign the fact that we're out to change society.
Yes, but how do you persuade your colleagues of that, other miners of it, you see?
Well, I think the situation was clearly illustrated last year when the communists were in leadership, in the main, the UCS, the miners' strike, etc. And it's only at pit level or at factory level or in these fights, be it the rents, that communists are shown as the only real leadership. for the workers. Therefore, in essence, it's by example that as the fight goes on, that has been more clearly seen by the people as a whole, that the communists are the only people to give leadership in the given struggles.
So from your point of view, in effect, every confrontation is strengthening the movement itself?
Yes, I would say quite definitely that is the position.
It's not only in the miners' union that the party has sought and gained influence. The Engineering Workers' Union was founded in 1920, at almost the same time as the British Communist Party. When he was still a party member, Hugh Scanlon, now the union's president, was a convener here at Metrovix, a factory with a party branch and a reputation as a training ground for committed trade unionists. It was from the 1930s that party members began to hold office in the union, first as shop stewards, then as full-time officials. Today, the relationship between the party and the union in Manchester is as important as ever. John Tocker, union man and party man, a key figure. Vic Eddersford, the party's senior district official and on the party's national political committee. Union and party officials meet together regularly in the snug of the Red Dragon pub, just up the road from the union's Manchester office.
Speaking to Ken Masters.
The relationship between the party and the union is completely open, and for a communist in industry, it's a duty to take responsibility. They see the factory as an arena of class conflict, in which the battle must be fought to defeat capitalism and to create the conditions in which it can be replaced by a socialist state where the workers hold power.
What, in Greater Manchester, I reckon we'll have about 6...
Since the ETU ballot rigging scandal of 1960, the party has had to be very circumspect in its union activity. What then are their aims now in the trade unions?
Basically and fundamentally, as communists, we're seeking a fundamental change in society.
Can I ask this? You see, how can your influence within the trade union movement help you to achieve that basic change?
Well, the change in society will obviously take time, and it will come about on the basis of fights on day-to-day issues that affect workers in this country, and sooner or later the working class of this country will come to the conclusion that there is fundamental need for change.
Later or sooner?
I wouldn't like to say just how far or how far eventually or how long that would take. I think it'll be a slow process, yeah.
How significant is it for the left, do you think, that a major union like your own has now much more of a left-wing leadership than previously?
One contribution they have made is to stop the full implementation of the Industrial Relations Act. That without a doubt. Certainly, I think if it hadn't have been for the actions that have been taken and led by the left generally in the movement, we would have had the act round our necks in no uncertain terms at this point in time.
As a communist trade unionist and a communist in the AUEW, do you regret the fact that Hugh Scanlon left the party?
Personally, yes. But everybody will make their own decisions, and I've considerable admiration for Hugh Scanlon, the job he has done. It's debatable if he would have been permitted to do the job if he'd have remained a member of the party. People say yay and some people say no.
You mean he would have been blocked?
Yes, that is a view. It's not my view. No, I am sorry that he did leave the party, and I think he could have made a far bigger contribution in that way, but that's not denying the type of contribution he has made, of course.
What lessons did the party within industry learn from the ETU business?
Certainly it's endeavoured in its industrial work never to permit a group of party members to become a party within themselves. And our industrial work is conducted. Away from union premises in pubs, away from trade union gatherings of members that come together, do not meet in party premises. They will meet in a way to try and overcome that particular stigma.
16 King Street, London, the party's headquarters. Inside, the party's political committee, once called the Politburo, meets every Wednesday at 9:30. John Gollan has chaired its meetings since 1956. The Communist Party is a disciplined party. The decisions reached here, by free discussion, become the party line, not because of any power these men command, but because of the hold the ideology has. Men like its industrial organiser, Bert Ramilson, favour revolution not to replace order with anarchy, but to establish their own disciplined, if parliamentary, system. One feels their instinct is still authoritarian.
Deep-sea water for the economy purposes of the...
Today, the members of the political committee are quite open about their basic strategy, and I asked Bert Ramilson to estimate the party's role in influencing the unions.
Well, I think quite a significant role. After all, there's certain criteria by which you can judge. And I think if we see that the policies that the party has been advocating becoming acceptable by the whole trade union and labour movement within a matter of a year or 18 months, it's one criteria by which we can judge the impact that the Communist Party has made on shifting the whole of the labour movement further to the left. Equally, in the changes that have taken place in the leadership of many trade unions by the election of communists and left-wingers generally, with the support of the Communist Party, so that to considerable extent the pressure from below, where the communist shop stewards and the Communist Party agitation and the literature and the Morning Star we use have all had an effect on helping to create conditions whereby policies which a trade union congress, for instance, not so long ago rejected, concretely, not so many years ago, that the Communist Party was the only one that warned the dangers of incomes policy, that warned about the dangers of state interference in trade union legislation, happily accepted by the Trade Union Congress. Now it is accepted by the movement as a whole. And I think to a considerable extent it is due to the work and the effort of communists as individuals inside the trade union movement and of the Communist Party as an organization.
Do you think, though, that this influence which you claim you've had on the trade unions will in fact change the Labour Party?
Well, it's bound to have a very important effect on the Labour Party. Let us see concretely. For the first time, to my knowledge, the electoral programme that the Labour Party will be fighting the next election on will be one jointly agreed to between the Trade Union Congress, the Parliamentary Labour Party, and the National Executive of the Labour Party. So that for the first time, the organised trade union movement, which carries within it to some considerable extent the influence of our party, expresses itself in policies that the Labour Party becomes committed to. I think equally we can see the changes in the leadership of the Labour Party going to the left, parallel to the changes to the left that are taking place in the leadership of the trade union movement. But that does not mean to say that I believe that in the absence of considerable pressure from below, that a Labour government would be necessarily implementing the sort of policies that it committed itself to. Nor do I believe that a trade union, no matter how militant and how left it is a substitute for a revolutionary political party such as the Communist Party.
You speak as if everything was going your way, but after all, after 50 years of activity, the Communist Party remains very small.
Well, I think one of the big mistakes to make is sort of project things. It's taken us so long to get from point A to B, it's going to take just as long to get from B to C, and so on and so on. But that's not the way things happen in real life. There's a tremendous acceleration of pace. Sometimes it's a result of one action. An idea becomes caught up by the masses, and millions of people begin to think in an entirely new way that it didn't before. Let me give you a concrete example. For something like 150 years of capitalism, workers were prepared to accept that a factory closes down, they'd go without a job. And all the argument was about how much redundancy money they would get. Until the workers in Upper Clyde shipyard, in which the Communist Party played, through its members, played an important role in leading that particular struggle, demonstrated that it is possible to fight for the right to work,
even within the framework of capitalism. And as a result of that particular struggle, literally millions of workers have been caught up with the idea of the possibility of fighting for the right to work. And indeed, scores of factories have followed the examples of the Upper Clyde shipyard, and factories are now open and functioning, which would have been shut if there hadn't been that sort of experience. I'm using this example to show that what might take in ordinary propaganda decades to convince people that one successful action in the Upper Clyde shipyard transformed the thinking of millions of people. And I believe the communist idea as the only way in which you can end the problems that face the people is to transform society into socialism, can very well, as a result of action and activity, achieve in a matter of days or weeks at the most what might under normal circumstances take decades.
That's the Marxist view, but although buried in Highgate Cemetery, Karl Marx never had much success or interest in getting his message across in Britain. He wrote in German, and from the start, the English middle classes felt threatened by his alien philosophy. The working class didn't adopt it either. British trade unionism was Methodist rather than Marxist, and the Labour Party was never revolutionary. But in 1926, the general strike brought Britain to the edge of class war. The middle class mobilised, and the communists enjoyed a sudden surge of popularity. Faced with a massive display of establishment power, only they had a clear aim for the strike, to bring down the government. But they didn't. The middle classes triumphed. Then came Mosley, the fascists and the Nazis in Germany. Suddenly, communism became morally attractive and exciting. In London's East End, workers barred the way to the black shirts, and from the universities, young intellectuals joined in the struggle. It was a time of increasing violence and hardship. Among the people most directly threatened by the fascists, the East End Jews, there was a move to join the ranks of the party. Two East End Jews who joined at the time were Joe and Bessie Lee. I asked Mrs. Lee if she remembered why.
Yes, I think so. It was because I found myself, living in a world which really had no use for me as a person.
Why not?
It was concerned only with the fact that I would be making money for somebody. It had no real interest in what my ambitions were, or in fact the ambitions of the young people that I was friendly with at the time. I was looking for a reason of why my parents were so defeated. Good, honest, hard-working people who were absolutely broken up, destroyed by the problems which life faced them with, the bringing up of their children, the poverty and so on. And in looking around to find the answer to why all this happened, I came upon the Communist Party. And I realised that they had a solution, or a part of the solution to this question I was asking.
Can you remember, though, what it was in the communist belief that really got you?
It was a practical question, a simple logic, which I could see was correct. There were the rich, the poor, the haves, the have-nots, and this explained it quite simply. It also explained that it wasn't necessary for it to remain like this. This was the important thing. It offered an escape from that kind of future, or lack of future, and that kind of life. I didn't want to be destroyed like my parents were destroyed. I wanted to live, like all the young people today want to live.
After Stalin's pact with Hitler, the party lost face and popularity. But once Russia joined the Allies, it became patriotic. The party's secretary, Harry Pollitt, called for a second front in the common cause, and communists cooperated in raising productivity in Britain's factories to defeat the common enemy. It seemed that the party had finally won its place in the society it hoped to change. But the end of the war in 1945 brought a bitter and unexpected disappointment. Labour triumphed, but although the electorate turned left and put Attlee into Downing Street, it ignored the communists. Once again, they were out in the cold with only 2 MPs. The party's electoral fortunes haven't improved since, and in 1973, the people who turn up at rallies are still very much a minority, in some ways almost a sect. At the last general election, they persuaded less than 40,000 people to vote for them. But they are a stubborn and resilient minority, coming disproportionately from special groups, such as Clydesiders, Scottish miners, and the children of communist parents. At this left-wing rally organised by the British Vietnam Peace Committee, a Christian of socialist conviction addresses sympathetic Marxists.
I notice there are not a few who represent the Communist Party, which is the heresy of the Christian faith, in which I have a good deal of sympathy, but I'm not a communist.
The communists welcome friends from any side, but they remain an elite in which parents, like those of David Lee, train their children for the future.
It's the duty of communists to influence their children. Their children are influenced otherwise by establishment ideas only. It's the duty of communists to open all the avenues to their children.
Looking at the Communist Party today in Britain, and remembering the Communist Party as it was in this country when you first joined it, what is the most important change that's come about in the party?
When I joined the party was small, immature, naive to a degree, and it didn't have a proper strategy for achieving socialism in this country. It had a concept of revolution which was based largely on the Russian experiences. It was outside of the decisive sections of the working class in this country, and it was largely a propaganda machine.
Now, is that the basic difference now, that it's within the key sections of the working class?
That is an important basic difference, that even though it is small, because it's in these decisive sections, it's extremely powerful. It's also gaining additional strength amongst the women, who are a decisive force for progress in this country. It also has a strategy for achieving socialism in this country, which it hadn't in the early days, the British road to socialism.
That programme acknowledges the real facts of the party's situation. For success, it believes it has to work within the parliamentary system. And as it lacks electoral support, it feels it can only do this by trying to form an alliance with the Labour left. To get that, it has to use its influence in the trade unions to pressure the Labour Party. This is the communist strategy of left unity, which Jimmy Reid proposes.
Because, you see, Alan, my whole contention is that the demarcation line in British politics is between left and right, not between Labour and Conservative. You draw a line. This is the real issue in British politics. Here is the left, there is the right. But I think myself that the role of the Communist Party is not to consider that we've got a monopoly of socialist principles, but we're an organised force for socialism, and we're working within the framework of the wider left movement and working for left unity, which is a very important consideration. Left unity.
Is that left unity best created at the point of action?
The important job for the left is to recognise the importance of the mass struggle on issues, but to realise that these are struggles against the effects of capitalism. And you must bring, or strive to bring, an understanding in political terms to the great mass of the people that there's no point in fighting against the effects for the rest of your life. You've also got to root out the cause. It's like a doctor trying to treat the measles by scrubbing the spots. The analysis has got to be one that, yes, we'll fight on the issues, which in essence are the effects of capitalism in our daily life, but surely we're not content to live the rest of our lives fighting against the effects of capitalism. Let's end it.
In a capitalist Britain, the party feels that the strategy requires a paper which can spell out the line day by day. The right words matter to communists. The correct text is the key to correct action. George Matthews, as editor of the Morning Star, thus has a key ideological position in the party, confirmed by his membership of the political committee. The paper's circulation of 50,000 may be small, but its survival is essential to the communist strategy of left unity. That's why its incidental role of representing the British party's viewpoint to communist parties abroad is financially crucial. The paper would be even more precarious without those eager readers in the People's Republics. But the readers it has to convince are British.
We provide a platform for the whole left, but our campaigning is directed towards advocating and stimulating support for the policy of the Communist Party. And we fulfill that role through our news treatment, the way we present the news, through our editorial comments and in our feature articles. I think that the party members regard the Star as their main weapon for getting across the policy which they're fighting for among the people with whom they come in contact.
How, as editor, do you see the function of the journalist on the Star?
Well, the journalist on the Star has a very different function in many ways from journalists on other papers. We haven't any divisions in our minds between what we believe and what we write. We write what we write from conviction, and not because we have to, because it's the policy of Lord Thompson or Richard Murdoch, or Rupert Murdoch, or whoever it may be. So our journalists work here because they're committed to a particular point of view.
Parallel with their strategy in the unions, the party tries to get other people to join them on the left by concentrating on issues. At Hemel Hempstead, they focused on prices and rents, and on both issues, women members are very active. Sometimes the effect is to force local Labour Party people to choose between the left and the right as the communists define the terms. The party gains influence and is able to campaign as part of the wider left rather than as communists. In Hemel, the party has only 70 members in a population of 70,000, but their impact is disproportionate.
What is the reaction of people to you when you are campaigning?
Well, it's very difficult to generalise, of course, but if we take a specific issue like prices or rents, then in general women understand it. They don't necessarily know that we're communists if we're involved in, say, the tenants movement or our women's group. But depending on the issue, of course, they generally respond very well.
Well, now, how do you move from campaigning on specific issues and applying pressure there to actually winning support for the Communist Party in a place like Hemel?
I think in a sense you always have to campaign on specific issues, but in every issue you take up, you hope that you're also going to get your message across that in general, these problems will not be solved, in a capitalist society. And, you hope that this is the way your message gets across.
Do you think, though, that perhaps people should know that you are communists when you campaign on a particular issue?
Yes, in fact,
we don't hide the
we
fact.
never hide the fact. I mean, lots of people associate me with the party.
I mean, if they ask, we would tell
obviously.
them. Yes. And as they get to know you in a particular campaign, if they come in and work with you, obviously they will get to know. We don't hide it. But on many issues like the rents, it's best if the Communist Party works in, say, a tenants association rather than as the Communist Party, because this involves more people. Otherwise, it would be difficult to sort of get contact.
At their branch meeting in Hemel, the party can chalk up the results of this style of campaigning. Recently, through their fight against the Housing Finance Act, they've recruited several new members from among the 2,000 people whom they got to join a tenants association. In a party of 30,000, it's an achievement to issue a new party card, the sign of total commitment. It was the branch secretary of this local party, David Lee, who converted Mavis Belcher to communism.
He told us about the Housing Finance Act and, how our rents were going to go up more and more and more. And after he'd finished talking, they appealed to us to join the Tenants and Residents Association, and also appealed for people to take the petition round our streets to petition against the Housing Finance Act.
Did you know then that David Lee, in fact, was a communist and branch secretary?
No. I didn't know any communists. Not at all. Up to then, I thought of communists as, Russian spies. And they'd shoot people and sell England's secrets, and not very nice people at all. But because I'd met some through the Tenants Association and I liked them, I really did like them. They were nice people. I wanted to know more about them.
So what did you do?
I went to the local library and I took out a book called, the only one I could find, at the time, was a book called What Did Marx Really Say? And I read that, and I didn't understand it all. There were lots of things in it that I wanted to ask questions on.
Did you find the intellectual part of it, dialectical materialism and so on, very difficult?
Yes, I didn't understand all that. I still cannot, even though I've had it very carefully explained to me, dialectical materialism, I still don't really understand it, but the thing about what I do understand about communism is that we all work together for the common good. Instead of just working for a few people, big capitalists, we all work together for the common good. we all improve England, make a better life for everybody.
Morning Star, the left.
Mavis Belcher's idealism sits uneasily with the history of communism and its record of left-wing tyranny in Eastern Europe.
Morning Star, the left.
Once British communists like David Lee obediently defended every action of Moscow, but today their response is different.
Well, I think anybody must be worried about the suppression of individual liberties. Let me say this first of all, though, that I feel that perhaps not the fullest picture is given to the situation that exists in the Soviet Union. But if there are, and I believe it to be the case, denials of freedom, certain aspects of freedom for artists and writers in the Soviet Union, then of course I'm opposed to that. But of course that doesn't affect my position in relation to the British Communist Party. We have a party, an independent party, we pursue our own policies. And what the Soviet Union does can influence our party in the sense that it can influence the support which we have, but I think that we shouldn't and do not, in fact, have to support a position in the Soviet Communist Party or Soviet government takes.
But would a socialist-communist alliance, were it ever really to gain power, be as tolerant of forces it considered reactionary in its society as the present Conservative government, for example, is tolerant of forces it considers revolutionary, like you?
Oh yes, undoubtedly so, and I think there are two reasons for this. That the British people have been, if you like, nurtured in a tradition of democratic practices, that they are prepared to allow people to express a point of view even though they themselves disagree with it. And I think that as far as communists are concerned, they will defend our right to express our views. By the same token, were we in power, they would not allow us to suppress other people's points of view, even if we disagreed with them.
But the Labour Party views such assurances with disbelief. It continues to keep the communists safely and formally at a distance by forbidding them as individuals to join the party and officially proscribing them as an organisation. Transport House remains a closed door, but the communists are optimistic that one day they will get in. They believe that their trade union influence and the pressure they can exert at grassroots level will tell in the end.
But you take any struggle of the workers, and you'll find Labour Party people and Communist Party people working together. And you see, the more the fight for socialist policies develop, the more the mass struggle develops. Side by side, there will be lefts, there'll be communists, there'll be lefts in the Labour Party, there'll be militants who belong to neither party. In other words, we begin to see the elements of the Broad Alliance for a socialist alternative at grassroots level developing. I think that's what we are witnessing in the Labour movement just now. The mass working class basis is beginning to assert itself. It's been relatively dormant for some period of time. And so we've had right-wing careerists masquerading as socialists, both in and out of government. I think their day is coming to an end.
What do you think are the chances of the Labour Party ever lifting its bans against the Communist Party?
Well, I rate the chances quite high. You see, the bans against the Communist parties and the unions have almost gone, under the compulsion of political and social events, because it's absurd for the working class to be divided in the face of this great concerted capitalist attack. Already the Labour Party is considering removing bans on friendship societies. But the most important thing is the position of the trade unions. You see, the Labour Party has 5.25 million affiliated trade union members. I'm one of them because I pay my political levy. But in order to represent your union at a Labour Party conference or gathering, you have to be an individual member of the Labour Party, and there's only 700,000 of these. So the rest of us are disenfranchised. And this is a democratic issue not only for communists, but for all trade unionists. I think this has to go. I think it will go in time. It's inevitable.
what do you really think are the prospects of achieving the kind of unity of the left that you want to see? Not in the unions, but electorally.
Well, in the immediate situation, I don't think the possibility is very high. But I would say this, that under the compulsion of the political situation, the actions which are being generated, and in particular the direct action, which is so influencing political events in the country, unity is developing at grassroots level. So it's raising this is raising this issue as to where we're going. And the logic of the situation is in that direction. But of course, anyone realist knows the tremendous political problems involved here. Nevertheless, things which perhaps are not possible now will be possible later under the compulsion of this tremendously moving and rich political situation which is before us.
Roy Hattersley, what are the chances, in fact, of the Labour Party lifting its bans on the Communist Party?
None. The Communist Party is a different party with different allegiances, with, in a very real sense, a different philosophy, with a different approach to politics, a party which runs candidates against the Labour Party at local and national level, and a party which is as much opposed to the Labour Party as the Conservatives or the Liberals. Of course, there's every chance that individual communists, like individual Conservatives, can join the Labour Party, having accepted the wisdom of the Labour Party's position. But the idea of an amalgamation is frankly nonsense.
Well, on that film, you heard John Gollan saying quite specifically that he thought the ban on friendship societies was about to go.
I think that's right. I certainly hope it's right. I think...
But do you see that as a step in a
No, of course I don't.
development?
I think the Labour Party over the last 20 years has tried to prevent its members from joining a number of altogether admirable associations, and I think we're a great deal more relaxed and a great deal more civilised about that than we were in the late 50s. But the idea that it's appropriate to be an organisation or member of an organisation that actually wants to foster relations with mainland China, which I certainly want to do, yet is somehow an indication that eventually the Communist Party is going to embrace the Labour Party and vice versa, seems to me to be the grossest piece of illogicality.
The Communist Party's industrial organiser quite specifically says that as a result of the way in which Labour Party policy during the next election, for example, will be formulated, that the Communist Party, his party, will have considerable influence on it.
Well, he would, wouldn't he? If I was the General Secretary or the industrial organiser of a party who had about as many members in the country as who vote for me in one small constituency out of 630 in Great Britain, I would feel I had to make claims about my influence other than my electoral strength. I think there's absolutely no evidence of that at all. I think if one examines the record of the Labour Party, out or in of government, the judgment on that examination is that we've made decisions on individual merits of individual cases. And I think there's absolutely no evidence to suggest that it's been influenced, let alone dominated, by communist thinking.
Hugh Scanlon, what was your reaction to Mr. Ramelson's suggestion that there was, in fact, a reality of some kind of united left now?
Well, I think it's as unscientific to say that there will be such an alliance as to say there won't. I don't know that anybody can say that there will or there won't. I've lived long enough to see all sorts of unheard of alliances. I can remember the con-libs, the lib-cons, the national cons, the national libs. I've seen the situation develop, and Roy has said he would have welcomed associations, for instance, the Chinese friendship and so on. But this is a phenomenon of the last few months.
So are you saying that you see a pattern there or not?
I say that I wouldn't like to say there wasn't such a pattern. I mean, take what's happened in France and in Italy, where they've been faced with the possibility of a right-wing coup d'etat. What does the left do in those circumstances? Does it say stay separated and perish, or does it say whether there are grounds faced with an emergency that might mean the survival of both?
Yes, but of course the circumstances of France are not the circumstances that exist in this country today.
And that is why one can't say definitely yea or nay. But it's as unscientific to say one as the other.
Angus Maud.
Well, I thought one of the most interesting things that was said was Mr. Jimmy Reed's statement that the demarcation line in politics, it is clear. It is between left and right. Now, this seems to me nonsense. In this country, as in the United States, the two great parties are coalitions covering a very wide spectrum of opinion. There are in the Conservative Party people who are pretty far to the right. There are some who are indistinguishable from liberals and others who have a marked collectivist slant. And in the Labour Party, there are people who are indistinguishable from liberals. There are also many Marxists. They are coalitions. And clearly, at the industrial level, the Communist Party hopes to push the Labour Party in one particular direction, which is the Marxist direction. So far, I don't think they've had very much success. I noted that Mr. Ramilson, the industrial organiser, said firmly that he thought the next Labour election manifesto, because it had to be jointly agreed with the TUC, could be heavily influenced by the Communist Party as a result of their influence in the TUC. He went on to say, that is not to say the Labour Party will carry out in office the policy it is committed to, which, well, he can say that again on all past history, but the suggestion that the Communist Party now is in fact going to push the Labour Party into a Marxist manifesto seems to me to be nonsense. But that's really for Roy Hattersley to say.
I think manifest nonsense. There were many things that were said during the programme which were fascinating. I mean, it ranged from Mrs. Mavis Belcher, who I must say seemed to me one of the more attractive women who've appeared on television in the last 10 years, who said she was a member of the Communist Party because they all work together for the common good. That seemed to me to be an admirable reason for joining a party. I happen to think she'd misguided to choose that party, but it seems to me to be an altogether admirable and sympathetic approach, and one's got to accept that as part of the communist philosophy. On the other hand, there seemed to be a more sinister and frankly dishonest attempt to demonstrate the relationship between the two parties. Let me take another example. Somebody, I can't remember who, said one of the Communist Party's great achievements was its influence on the Labour Party leadership and the creation of the Labour Party leadership. Well, let's take a fact. The fact is that in the poll for the Parliamentary Labour Party Committee, Mr. Reg Prentice came top last year and is a man with a very substantial future in the Labour Party. I very much doubt if he is, this evening, the favourite Labour Party member of the Communist Party. I very much doubt if he would have got Mr. Bert Ramilson's vote. I mean, the evidence is just not there to suggest that they are influencing Labour Party policy or Labour Party strategy.
Hugh Scanlon, do you accept this?
I doubt very much whether he would be the favourite son of the trade union movement at the present time from what he's saying. And what amazes me in this debate that's taken so far is the cynicism with which both Mr. Maud and Mr. Hattersley can dismiss this question about living up to policy which is determined by the rank and file. Because both parties are doing what Mr. Maud suggested the Labour Party has done. And really, this is a serious discussion. What is developing in the minds of the average British elector is the very fact that can they really believe the politicians? Can they really believe that the parties will carry it out? It's part of the job of the trade union movement to try and ensure that the Labour Party does.
And do you think, in fact, that the far left will be able, in a meaningful way, to influence the policy which the Labour Party goes into the next election with?
I think that the trade union movement will, I hope, work out a common strategy with the Labour Party. I want to see a Labour government re-elected on a socialist basis, on a programme jointly agreed between ourselves, that's the trade union movement, the parliamentary party and the executive of the party itself. But to suggest that the communists don't have an influence within the trade union movement, a very substantial influence, would be denying the obvious.
Yes, if I just to finish that. Yes, just to finish that, though, would you in fact say that the far left and the left within the trade union movement would in fact be able to ensure that a Labour government, were it elected, would to some extent anyway have to implement those policies? Or do you accept, in fact, the way in which Roy Hattersley has described that process?
No, I think that we can ensure, by the simple process of working out the type of policy and then ensuring that there are candidates elected that will carry that policy out.
But with the greatest respect, Alan, you ought not to ask Hugh Scanlon questions about the far left, as if there were questions about the Communist Party. The far left, as you call it, he and I might disagree with that term, are a proper and intrinsic part of the Labour Party. They're part of the Labour Party coalition. As part of the party and a part of the trade union movement, they'll agree a policy before the next election. And heaven knows, I want us to carry out that policy once it's been democratically decided. Now, that's one thing. That's the Labour Party. But it's very different from saying that the far left are synonymous with the Communist Party. They may be synonymous with Marxism, though many of them are not. But the idea that they're part of this closely knit little group acting in cells is not the same point. The point is that the Labour Party is a coalition of very many different views. Hugh is Marxist, I'm Methodist, and we come together in a great party. But that is not the same as saying one of the pressure groups is the Communist Party. The Communist Party is there informally, but it's not there formally within the Labour Party.
There is one thing that was said during the film, which I think it would be as well to discuss. And this was one of the Scottish Miners' Union leaders, who said that at the time of last year's coal strike, this was a strike not against the coal board, but against the government and against government policies. And he said, as they were now preparing to ballot on the subject of another miners' strike, we are prepared again to take the government on. Now, this clearly suggests that this is a politically slanted campaign, that it is aimed at the law of the land enacted by a democratically elected parliament, and that the strike is intended either to change the government or to get the law changed. Now, this seems to me to be something which the Communist Party's allies in the Labour Party, in the trade union movement, have to consider very carefully before they accept it as being the aim and object of a strike.
Well, of course, if this is going to be the yardstick of determining who is a communist, then the whole of the trade union movement's a communist, because we are against the government policy, and at times it will lead to strikes. And it will be a strike against government policy. My union's involved in that at the moment. But don't blame those who are compelled to strike. Blame the government which continues to interfere in those fields which previously have been matters between employers and trade unions.
So these strikes are not strikes in favour of higher pay or better conditions. They are strikes against a Tory government designed to bring the government down or change the law.
Why do you say that, Mr. Bond? Was the miners' strike deliberately a strike to bring the downfall of the government? Of course it wasn't.
That's what he said.
Oh, well, he might have said it. He was against the government, but the strike itself, the miners were involved in a pay struggle.
Hugh Scanlon is absolutely right. It's very important to distinguish in this programme between what individual people said during the film that preceded the discussion and what is reality. Now, the Labour Party has made it very clear, Harold Wilson has made it repeatedly clear, that the parliamentary leadership is against political strikes, and I'm deeply against political strikes. But having said that, one's got to be absolutely clear that the line between political and industrial strikes is very blurred. If you're striking against a railway board to get a decent wage, that's an industrial strike. If the government prevents the railway board from paying you a decent wage and you strike, is that an industrial or political strike?
Precisely.
I repeat that I'm deeply against political strikes, such as the Labour Party. But don't let's pretend this is a clear-cut issue, because it isn't.
And let me confirm, the trade union movement does not seek to overthrow governments by industrial action. But as Roy has already said, there comes a time when, if governments insist on certain previously amicable arrangements being overthrown, and you struggle against that, don't say that's a political strike. Blame those who seek to overthrow them.
Oh, but this is turning the argument on its head. What you are saying is that if Parliament, and a democratically elected Parliament, debates at enormous length a particular piece of legislation and passes it, then the trade unions can, if they so wish, strike against that law to try and get that law changed. In other words, the industrial action is political action.
No, I'm not saying that at all.
No, I didn't say you were, but Hugh Scanlon said.
I am saying something very close to that. Yes, and it would be. Well, that's the difference.
I wasn't talking to you.
I am saying quite deliberately that all governments must eventually rule by consent, and if you bring in a law which ostracises tens of millions of the citizens of these islands, to say that when they struggle against that law, that's a political strike, is stretching it to its utmost. But there is a political content in it. It's no good argument.
And Roy Hattersley, do you see that difference, in fact, as being the illustration of this difference between left and right that they spoke of in the film? This difference between you and...
No, of course I don't. I mean, I see the difference as a semantic one. I'm certainly not prepared to strike against laws, but I understand why people strike for improved conditions. And if that strike is directed against the government rather than industry, it's still a strike for improved conditions. But I'm totally and utterly opposed to striking against laws. And I believe that's the view of the Labour Party. It may be one of the distinctions between us and the Communist Party, but heaven knows there are very many more.
Hugh Scanlon, I just want to end, if I may, by asking you one question. You were at one stage a member of the party. Watching that film tonight, and the way in which the party now describes itself, do you in fact think that it has fundamentally changed, or is it the party that you remember?
Oh, well, I certainly wouldn't know. It's nearly 20 years since I was a member of the Communist Party. My differences and reasons for leaving are well known, and I don't want to reiterate them now. I will reiterate that my job is a trade union official. I have the responsibility of carrying out democratically arrived decisions of our union. That union is open to communists, Catholics, Protestants, white, black, yellow. They determine the policy. It's my job to carry it out. If I find in carrying that out on behalf of the executive, who have the ultimate responsibility, that we're in conflict with the government, it's not just this government, it might be any government that attempts to suppress by actions the democratic rights of millions of trade unionists. And that's what happened with the, forgive me for saying it, Roy, that's what happened with the Labour government, that's what happens with this government. I believe we've learned the lesson.
Well, I think Hugh Scanlon is right in a small degree, in that there can be no industrial policy, there can be no industrial relations or incomes policy which doesn't have the consent of the unions, and I accept that entirely, and I think the party accepts entirely. But I must say, with greater respect to him and you, I'm not sure it's terribly relevant, the relation between the Communist Party and the Labour Party.
Yes. I think what we really need to know is where are the limits of the political strike? Against what laws can you strike and against what laws can you not strike? If they have a pay and conditions content, you can strike against them. But if they're laws relating to something else, it's a very easy step to say you can strike against any law you don't happen to like. And then industrial action becomes political action.
This is true. I don't want to deny this. It's very, very difficult, more particularly in the complicated arrangements that we're now entering into. It's very difficult to draw the line. When does something cease to be industrial and start to be political? All I'm saying is that I can't draw that line. If the policy of our union means that we find ourselves in conflict with an employer that isn't resolved as a result of discussion, we've only one answer. That's to withdraw our labour. Now, that must be true if the government take over the role of the employer.
Gentlemen, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much.
So, Scanlon, Hattersley Maude and the British Communist Party. The next big story of this week hasn't quite surfaced yet. That's the white paper on Northern Ireland and its future, power sharing, Irish dimension, majority rule, all the rest, which Mr. Willie Whitelaw is due to produce almost any moment now. Of course, it's had many forerunners in speculation and guessing about what it might contain, so we may suppose that it won't actually contain anything very much that people haven't speculated about. But among the forerunners have been quite enormous security precautions, not only in Northern Ireland, but here in Britain, in public buildings, at Parliament and so on. Even MPs' cars have been searched. Angus Maude, an MP who's been searched today. Well, we'll be reporting on that, but from Panorama tonight. Good night.